I still remember the first day I walked into that office, like it was yesterday. I stood outside the building for a full minute before going in, just looking up at it. Glass walls, people walking in and out confidently like they belonged there. And I kept thinking, do I really belong here? Because getting that job wasn't easy for me. My name is Sofia. I am 25. I wasn't the smartest in my class. I didn't have connections. I wasn't one of those people who just get opportunities. I had to fight for everything. Late nights, rejections, self-doubt. There were days I honestly thought I'd never make it anywhere. So when I finally got that email, "You're hired," I didn't celebrate loudly. I just sat there, quietly, and smiled. Because for the first time, it felt like life was finally giving me something back. That job meant everything to me. Maybe too much. When I walked in on my first day, I was nervous, yeah, but also excited. I noticed everything. The way people talked, the way they carried themselves, the way they typed like they knew exactly what they were doing. I told myself, just learn, just stay focused, don't mess this up. And then I met my boss, Mr. Khalid. He didn't shake my hand properly, didn't smile, just looked at me for a second and said, "I hope you're here to work, not to learn slowly." I didn't understand what he meant at that time. I just nodded and said, "Yes, sir." Looking back now, that was the first red flag. But when you're new somewhere, you ignore red flags because you don't want to believe something is wrong with the place you worked so hard to reach. The first week went okay. I stayed quiet, observed everything, did exactly what I was told. But in the second week, things started changing. I remember the meeting I spoke in. I had prepared for it the night before. I even practiced what I was going to say, not because it was complicated, but because I didn't want to sound stupid. When the moment came, I spoke carefully. "I think we can improve the client response rate by adjusting." He cut me off. Not loudly, not aggressively, but in a way that made it worse. He said, "If you think, that means you're not sure. And if you're not sure, don't speak." Some people smiled. One person laughed quietly, and I just sat there. I didn't say anything after that, but that moment stayed with me. The next few weeks, it didn't stop. It actually got worse. Every time I tried to contribute, he shut me down. Every time I did something right, he ignored it. And every time something went wrong, even if it wasn't my fault, it somehow became my responsibility. At first, I thought, maybe he's just testing me. Then I thought, maybe I'm actually not good enough. That thought is dangerous, because once it gets into your head, it starts changing how you see yourself. I started doubting everything, even simple tasks. I would double-check emails 5 times before sending them. I would hesitate before speaking. I would replay conversations in my head after going home thinking, why did I say that? That sounded so stupid. And the worst part? No one said anything. People saw it happening, but they stayed quiet. One day, I asked a coworker, "Is he always like this?" He just looked at me and said, "Just don't get on his bad side." I wanted to say, "I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to do my job." But I didn't say it, because I was starting to understand something. This wasn't a place where effort mattered. It was a place where silence kept you safe. But I didn't want to stay safe. I wanted to prove myself, so I worked harder. I stayed late almost every day. Sometimes I was the last one to leave. I skipped dinners, ignored messages from friends, because I kept thinking, one good project, one good moment, and everything will change. And then, I got that project, the big one. When he assigned it to me, I was surprised. He said, "Don't mess this up." That's it. No guidance, no discussion, just pressure. But I was happy, because finally, I had a chance. I worked on that project like my life depended on it. I'm not even exaggerating. There were nights I fell asleep on my laptop. There were mornings I woke up with anxiety thinking I missed something. But I kept going, because I wanted it to be perfect. Not for him, for me, for the version of me that almost gave up so many times. When I finally finished it, I just sat there staring at it. I felt proud. For the first time since joining that company, I felt like I did something right. When I gave it to him, my hands were slightly shaking. I said, "I think this could really help." He didn't react much, just said, "I'll see." That was it. But still, I felt hopeful. The next day changed everything. There was a big meeting, important people, senior management, even some external clients. I didn't know my project would be part of it. I walked in casually, sat down, opened my notebook, and then he started presenting. At first, I wasn't paying full attention, but then I saw the slide, and my brain just froze because I recognized it. The layout, the numbers, the structure. It was mine. I told myself, no, maybe it's similar. But then the next slide came, and the next, and the next. And there was no doubt anymore. It was my work, every single part of it. And he was presenting it like it was his, explaining it confidently, adding small changes here and there, but the core, that was mine. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, listening to my own ideas being praised under someone else's name. When people started clapping, that's when it hit me the hardest. Because I realized something. It wasn't just about him stealing my work. It was about how easily it happened, how no one questioned it, how invisible I was. After the meeting, I didn't even think. I just walked to his office. I didn't care about fear at that point. I asked him, "Why did you do that?" And he looked at me like I asked something stupid. He said, "Do what?" I said, "That was my project." He leaned back in his chair, calm, too calm, and said, "Not anymore." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "You didn't even mention me." And then he said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He said, "You should be grateful you're even here." And then, "You're replaceable." That sentence didn't just hurt, it changed something inside me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't talk to anyone. I just sat in my room, in silence, thinking and thinking and thinking, until one thought became clear. If I stay like this, nothing will ever change. The next day, I went back to work, but I wasn't the same person anymore. I stopped trying to impress him. I stopped seeking approval. I stopped speaking unless necessary. But I started observing, really observing. Things I ignored before started standing out. Files that didn't make sense, numbers that didn't match, emails that felt off. At first, I ignored it, because honestly, I didn't want more problems. But curiosity is strange. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. One evening, I stayed late, not to work, but to check something. I opened a folder I had seen earlier, restricted. I knew I shouldn't. I really did, but I clicked anyway. And that moment changed everything. Inside that folder was something I never expected. Data manipulation, hidden transactions, reports that didn't match official records. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding, so I checked again, and again, and again. But the truth didn't change. This company was doing something very wrong, and my boss was deeply involved. I remember leaning back in my chair, just staring at the screen, thinking, what do I do with this? Because now, this wasn't about disrespect anymore. This was bigger. But still, a part of me couldn't ignore everything he had done. The humiliation, the way he made me feel small, the way he treated me like I didn't matter. And slowly, an idea started forming. Not emotional, not impulsive, clear, careful. I started collecting evidence, quietly, every day a little more. Emails, reports, screenshots. I made sure everything was real, everything was accurate. I wasn't going to make a mistake, because this was serious. At night, I would sit in my room and organize everything, and every night I asked myself the same question. Should I really do this? Because I knew the risk. I could lose everything. My job, my reputation, my future. But then I would remember his voice again. You're replaceable. And I would continue. Weeks passed, and finally, I had everything. Proof. Solid proof. That night, I opened my laptop, wrote the email, attached all the files, and then I stopped. My finger was on the trackpad, but I didn't click. I just sat there. My heart was beating so fast because I knew once I do this, there's no going back. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and then I clicked send. After that, everything changed. Not immediately, but quickly. Rumors started, then news, then chaos. The company was under investigation. People were panicking, managers were stressed, and my boss, for the first time, looked scared. A few days later, authorities came. I remember that moment so clearly. The entire office went silent. They walked in, serious, focused, and went straight to his office. Minutes later, they brought him out. And for the first time, he wasn't powerful. He wasn't confident. He wasn't in control. He looked defeated. As he was leaving, he looked at me, and in that moment, I think he understood. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just looked back, calm, because for the first time, things felt fair. Later, they found out it was me. I didn't deny it. I told the truth. And surprisingly, they didn't treat me like a criminal. They called me a whistleblower. But still, I lost my job, and life didn't go back to normal. It changed. Months later, I started again. New place, new people. One day in a meeting, I had an idea, and I hesitated. Then someone said, "We're listening," and that moment felt different. I spoke, and no one interrupted, no one laughed, they just listened. And after that, someone said, "That was a great idea." And I smiled, not because I needed approval, but because that's how it should have been from the start. Looking back now, I don't just see revenge. I see a lesson about respect, about silence, about knowing your worth. Because sometimes, the moment you stop accepting disrespect is the moment everything changes. Have you ever stayed silent when someone disrespected you at work or anywhere else and later wished you had spoken up? How did it change you?